I'm Emily Carter, and for most of my life I've known exactly how invisible I am in my family. That day at Fort Belvoir was supposed to be about my father. Colonel Richard Carter was being honored for his lifelong service, and I showed up because that's what daughters do. I wore a plain navy dress, something quiet, something that wouldn't distract from his moment. The hall was filled with old uniforms and newer ones, shiny medals, sharp salutes, and stories soaked in glory. When they called his name, the crowd stood and clapped like he was the statue out front come to life. He stepped to the podium with the same booming confidence I'd grown up with, the kind that always made people listen and made me feel small. He began by thanking the guests, the base commander, his colleagues, and then his voice shifted. "I'm proud of this family," he said, lifting his chin, "especially Captain Dean Rogers, my son-in-law. A real hero, boots on the ground, the kind who doesn't sit behind a screen." Everyone laughed softly. I felt my breath catch, but I didn't flinch. I clapped too, like a good daughter. There was no mention of me, not a single word. Not my years at Langley, not the classified missions, not the lives I helped save from halfway around the world. He didn't even glance my way, and that hurt more than I expected, because I didn't need praise. I just wanted to exist in his story. When the ceremony ended, people swarmed him. I stood near the back, smiling at people who didn't know my name. One woman touched my arm and said, "You must be proud of your dad." I nodded. That was easier than saying the truth. Later, in the parking lot, I sat in my car staring at the steering wheel. The heat blasted against my face, but I couldn't shake the cold feeling in my chest. I came to honor my father. He came to forget I was there. And in that moment, I understood something clearly for the first time. My father didn't dislike me. He just didn't see me. And that might be worse. When I was 10, I asked my dad if he thought I could ever join the army. He looked at me over his newspaper and said, "Sure, if you want to hand out clipboards." I laughed then because I thought he was joking, but he wasn't. To him, real soldiers carried rifles, not pens. Growing up in a military household meant knowing how to salute before I could spell my name. Our home was filled with medals, black and white photos from deployments, and stories of the guys he served with. But I wasn't one of the guys. I was the daughter, the one meant to smile during ceremonies and keep quiet when the men talked about war. I used to sit at the kitchen table, sketching planes or pretending to write intel reports just to get his attention. Once, I even made my own fake ID badge that said, "Strategic Analyst." He saw it, chuckled, and said, "You'll make a great secretary one day." I laughed with him because I didn't know how to push back yet. But I remember feeling something in me close up, just a little. In high school, I joined the ROTC, thinking maybe if I wore the uniform, he'd see me differently. He came to the awards banquet but left before my name was called. Said he had a briefing. I told myself it was just bad timing, that maybe next time he'd stay. When I got accepted into a military intelligence program, I thought he'd be proud. I remember calling him, the excitement spilling over in my voice. He paused and said, "Huh? So you'll be pushing paper in a bunker?" I told him it wasn't like that. That it was real field work, real risk. But he didn't hear me, or maybe he just didn't want to. At family dinners, he'd brag about my cousin Luke, a combat medic, or my brother-in-law Dean, who led patrols in Kandahar. But when it came to me, he'd say, "Emily's smart, works with computers or something." And that would be the end of it. I learned to smile through it, but each time, it chipped away a little more. I tried to earn his respect in every way I knew. I worked harder than anyone in my unit, learned 3 dialects, memorized satellite protocols, and deployed without complaint. But it was never enough. Not for him. Not when I wasn't the kind of soldier he could brag about over coffee with his old squad. The truth is, I never wanted to be a hero. I just wanted to matter. And somehow, in my father's world, you didn't matter unless you came home with sand in your boots and scars on your arms. I came home with reports no one could read and stories I wasn't allowed to tell. To him, that wasn't service. It was silent, and I started believing him. The call came just after midnight. My phone buzzed once, no ringtone, no name, just a code I recognized immediately. Within minutes, I was out the door, hair still damp from sleep, boots half-laced, ID clipped to my collar. The base was already lit like daylight. Floodlights humming, radios squawking low across the lot. Inside the data center, the air felt colder than usual. No one spoke unless necessary. I nodded at the shift lead, who just pointed to a terminal waiting for me. The screen flashed a string of intercepted signals. At first glance, it looked like routine static, noise in a crowded spectrum. But something in the pattern stopped me. My hands moved fast, instinct guiding me through layers of encryption. I filtered out decoys, tracked metadata, and mapped coordinates. I didn't blink. Behind me, I could hear someone pacing, murmuring updates into a headset. I stayed locked in. There wasn't time for second guessing, not with this much chatter coming out of the mountains. Then it hit me. The repetition wasn't random. It was a route code, disguised in time intervals, buried inside frequencies that looked broken. A convoy route. Ours. I ran simulations twice, then a third time, just to be sure. If I was wrong, it meant nothing. If I was right, 50 American soldiers were heading straight into a kill zone. I stood up, slid a tablet across the table, and said, "We need to reroute Echo Unit, now." The room froze. Someone asked me if I was sure. I said nothing, just pointed at the data again. That was enough. Within 60 seconds, orders were relayed. The operation's name blinked across a classified console. Dust Raven. I stayed behind as the team scattered to implement the changes. I listened to the coordinates being updated, the convoy redirected by just 6 miles. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like gravity, like the weight of knowing I was responsible for lives I'd never meet. As the adrenaline faded, I stared at the screen, heart still racing. I didn't think of my father or whether he'd ever believe this counted as service. I didn't think of medals or records. I thought of the men I might have saved. I whispered the words to no one. Please let it be in time. That night, I signed the report under my assigned code. No one in the room said thank you. No one needed to. We all understood. This was the job. And for the first time, I didn't need anyone else to see me. I just needed them to live. The warning went out just 3 minutes before they would have entered the valley. It was one short transmission, buried in a secure channel, masked in code only a few could understand. The response was immediate. Echo Unit changed direction, and the convoy rerouted over higher ground, just out of reach of the waiting ambush. Later reports confirmed it. Drones picked up the heat signatures of a full insurgent unit lying in wait with IEDs embedded along the original path. If they hadn't changed course, they wouldn't have stood a chance. I remember staring at the report, knowing exactly what hadn't happened because of one message I sent. That message didn't carry my name, just the code. Eagle 17. The next day, life moved on like it always does. I walked past the mess hall where a few soldiers from that same unit were laughing over coffee. They didn't know me. They never would. One of them said something about a lucky break. I kept walking. Back at my station, no one mentioned the warning. No one needed to. The analysts reviewed the sequence, double-checked the reroute, and signed off. Mission averted. Protocol followed. My keyboard still held the imprint of where my fingers had pressed down hardest that night. But it wasn't something you frame or tell stories about over dinner. I got a brief note on my terminal. Signal verified. Good work. No signature, no eye contact, just a quiet nod from across the room that lasted less than a second. That was all. Then we moved on to the next threat. Another blip, another screen, another nameless life worth saving. I went back to my bunk that night and lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. My chest felt heavy, not from guilt or fear, but from something I couldn't name. A kind of sadness wrapped in pride. I had done something good, something real. And still, it felt like I was disappearing into the walls. There was no ceremony, no flag raised, no father calling to say, "I heard what you did." There was only silence, the kind that seeps into your bones and stays there. I told myself it didn't matter, that I hadn't done it for applause, that doing my job was enough. But I would have given anything for someone, just one person, to say my name. Not the code, not the file, just me, Emily. For once, to be seen not as a ghost in the machine, but as the reason they made it home. And even if that moment never came, I kept showing up. Because some of us serve in silence, and sometimes silence is the only proof we were ever there. After the mission, I returned to the base like nothing had happened. There were no banners, no debriefing worth remembering, just a stack of reports that needed updating. My desk was where I had left it. My badge still clipped to the same lanyard, and my name still meant nothing to anyone but the system. Weeks passed, then months. The memory of what I'd done started to blur. Not because I forgot, but because no one ever said it out loud. In a place where medals were pinned weekly and stories of valor passed through the mess hall like wildfire, I became quieter, smaller. My father called once, asked how work was going. I told him things were fine, that we'd averted something serious. He laughed, said, "Still saving the world with a keyboard?" I didn't answer. He didn't notice. At family dinners, he went on about my brother-in-law, about field medals and sandstorms and real war. I sat 2 seats down, nodding at all the right moments, pretending I hadn't spent months scanning the very terrain those soldiers walked through. Sometimes I imagined what it would feel like to interrupt him. Just once. To say I saved people. I made the call that stopped a bloodbath, but I never did. In his eyes, I wasn't a soldier. I hadn't kicked down doors or carried a weapon. I didn't wear scars across my skin or walk as the weight of combat had changed me. So I didn't count. And the more he said it, the more I started to believe it. At work, I became the woman in the corner. Efficient, dependable, invisible. I stopped volunteering for extra shifts, stopped raising my hand in meetings. I still did my job, and I did it well, but the fire that used to drive me dimmed. It's hard to stay proud when no one remembers your name. I stopped correcting people when they assumed I was in admin. Let them think what they wanted. At some point, the truth didn't matter anymore. Not if it was always going to be locked behind red tape and clearance levels no one cared to understand. At night, I would lie awake, listening to the hum of the base generators outside my window. Some nights, I thought about requesting reassignment. Other nights, I thought about quitting entirely. But every time I packed a bag in my head, something stopped me. Maybe it was stubbornness. Or maybe I still wanted to believe that being quiet didn't mean being worthless. The silence became familiar. It wrapped around me like armor, making me harder to reach. Even my mother started saying less. She meant well. But every time she said, "Your father's just from another time," it felt like another excuse for why I didn't deserve to be seen. Eventually, I stopped telling anyone what I did. The mission faded into memory, known only to a handful of people, and one classified report buried in a database no one would open again. And with it, a piece of me stayed buried too. Not because I chose to hide, but because no one thought to ask. It was late afternoon when he showed up at the training center. I was gathering materials after a community outreach session, ready to lock up and disappear like always. The footsteps behind me were measured, deliberate, and when I turned, I saw a tall man with silver hair and a look that stopped me cold. "Emily Carter?" he asked. His voice was steady but carried something that felt like the edge of memory. I nodded. He stepped closer and held out his hand. "Colonel James Rourke, Kandahar, 2013, Operation Dust Raven." My breath caught. That name, that year. I didn't move. He didn't need me to speak. A message came through. We were headed straight into a death trap. Then someone, Eagle 17, changed our course. His voice cracked just once. "I lost good men that year, but I didn't lose everyone. Because of you." I couldn't look away from him. For years, I had lived with the silence, buried under the weight of classified reports and forgotten files. And now, here he was, eyes shining, voice raw with something close to reverence. "I've been trying to find the person behind that call for years," he said. "I never imagined it was you." He took my hand, firm but not forceful. "Thank you, Emily. You saved more lives than you'll ever know." I didn't speak. I couldn't. But in that moment, I felt something lift from my chest. He didn't need me to explain. He didn't need proof. He just knew. And for the first time since that mission, I saw what it looked like to be truly seen. Not by a crowd, not by a headline, but by someone who had lived the cost of what I did and had come back just to say thank you. The hall was packed with uniforms, ribbons, and the low hum of small talk. Another veteran's tribute, another round of speeches and applause. I was there because my father insisted. He sat in the front row, polished shoes, proud posture, waiting for his moment on stage. I sat near the back, quiet as always, expecting nothing. Then Major General Lang took the podium. His voice, calm and deliberate, cut through the room like a command. "Before we begin, there's one name that hasn't been properly honored." The room stilled. Even the press lowered their cameras. During Operation Dust Raven, a critical intelligence warning prevented the deaths of 43 soldiers. I felt my breath stop. He continued. The source of that warning was an encrypted message signed only as Eagle 17. Today we confirm the identity of that operator, Emily Carter. The silence was immediate, heavy. Dozens of heads turned. My father didn't move, his face drained of color, jaw locked, eyes wide like he had seen a ghost. Cameras flashed. Someone gasped. A ripple moved through the room like a shock through water. My name, not a code, not a number. My name. I sat frozen, not knowing what to do, what to feel. The general looked straight at me. "On behalf of every life saved that day, we thank you." I didn't stand. I couldn't. But inside, something shifted. Years of doubt cracked wide open. Every dismissal, every silence. Every time my father looked past me, gone. And in that space, for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt known. A quiet truth had finally been spoken, and there was no taking it back. He found me in the hallway behind the auditorium, long after the crowd had thinned. The lights were low, the echo of voices fading behind closed doors. He looked older than I remembered. Not in years, but in weight. His shoulders, once always squared, were slumped. He walked slowly, hands tucked into his pockets like he didn't know what to do with them. "Emily," he said, voice hoarse. I nodded, but didn't speak. He stood there for a moment, staring at the floor, then lifted his eyes to mine. I didn't know. I should have asked. I should have seen. His words came out clipped, as each one cost him. "You were right there, and I never looked." He took a step closer. "I spent so long thinking honor looked a certain way. I was wrong." There was no lecture in his tone, no defense, just quiet regret. "I'm sorry." That word sat between us, heavy and real. He wasn't a colonel at that moment. He was just my father, uncertain and trying. I let a breath go. "I didn't need you to be proud of Eagle 17. I needed you to respect Emily Carter." He blinked, lips pressed tight, then nodded slowly. "I do," he said. "I just wish I had sooner." I didn't cry. I didn't fold into his arms or tell him it was okay. Because it wasn't. Not really. But it was something. I put a hand on his shoulder. "We don't get to redo the past. But we can stop dragging it behind us." He looked at me with a kind of awe, like he was seeing me for the first time. "You grew into someone better than I deserved." I didn't respond. He had said what I needed to hear. We stood in silence for a few seconds longer. Then I turned to leave. This time, he didn't stop me. He didn't try to explain away the years. He just let me go. Not out of distance, but out of respect. And in that quiet, something between us settled. Not perfect, but finally, honest. The ceremony came weeks later, held in a quiet room deep inside the Pentagon. No cameras, no reporters, just a few high-ranking officers, people who understood the weight of silence and the cost of decisions made behind screens. When they handed me the medal, it felt cool in my hand. Heavier than I expected, but I didn't feel proud in the way I thought I would. I felt calm. There were no speeches, just a single line spoken aloud. "For service rendered under Operation Dust Raven." I nodded, accepted it, and stepped back. Afterward, I went home, placed the medal in a small box, and tucked it into the back of my drawer. It didn't belong on display. Not because I wasn't proud of it, but because what it stood for wasn't something anyone else needed to see. That night, I sat by the window, the sky soft with stars. I thought about everything I had carried all these years, the silence, the weight, the want to be seen, and I realized something simple. I never needed the applause. I only needed to know that what I did mattered, that someone made it home because I did my job. The world still doesn't know the whole story. That's okay. Some truths are too heavy for headlines, and some honors aren't meant to shine. They're meant to keep you grounded, steady, reminded of who you are when no one's watching. Because at the end of it all, that's what stays with you. Not the medal, not the applause, just the quiet, unshakable knowing that you did the right thing, even if no one ever says your name. Honor is what you do when no one is watching.